The committee will come to order. We're meeting today to adopt the committee rules and other business related to the organization of the Rules Committee of the 119th Congress. Before we begin the business before us today, I want to take a moment to welcome everyone to the Rules Committee. I'm honored to be back at the Rules Committee and to have been appointed chair by Speaker Johnson. I look forward to working with the esteemed members of the committee, especially Ranking Member Jim McGovern. Many of our members have previously served on the committee, and I welcome you back. For the majority, I welcome back Representatives Michelle Fischbach, Ralph Norman, Chip Roy, Aaron Houchin, Nick Langworthy, and Austin Scott. For the minority, I welcome back Ranking Member McGovern, Representatives Mary Gay Scanlon, Joe Neguse, and Teresa Leger Fernandez, who, when she says her name, it's just like music. I wish I could say it the way she says it. We'll be joined this Congress by two new members beginning their service for the majority on the Rules Committee. I welcome Representatives Morgan Griffith and Brian Jack. As you all know, the Rules Committee plays a critical role in facilitating the deliberation and amendment of major legislation in the House. During the 118th Congress, the Rules Committee established a legacy in broadening the voices heard of all members, from the highest of rank to the rank and file. The committee implemented House rules changes to create a more open, transparent, and accountable process for the American people. Speaker Johnson has promised the American people to embark on a path marked by liberty, security, strength, prosperity, and opportunity. I look forward to fulfilling that promise. As chair, I also intend for the Rules Committee to maintain the same collegiality that we have traditionally enjoyed. The Rules Committee traditionally has not enforced the 5-minute rule. However, we'll review this practice and make changes if necessary. We'll ensure that all points of view are heard and considered, but I ask members of the committee to be respectful in the timing of their questioning to other committee members and to our witnesses. I want to extend a particular welcome back to our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, and thank him very much for his kind words upon my appointment. You have my deepest appreciation for your distinguished service on the committee. I'm delighted you'll continue to serve with us as ranking member. Before we proceed to the business before the committee, I yield to the ranking member for any opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Chairwoman Foxx, and congratulations on your new role as chairman of the House Rules Committee. You and I don't agree on much. We probably can't even agree on what to have for lunch. But while we rarely see eye to eye, I can say that you are a committed, hardworking public servant who fights tirelessly for what you believe in and the people you represent, values that I share. And we've served together on this committee in the past, leading me to believe that you appreciate the gravity of what it means to steer this committee, and I trust that you will be dedicated to upholding its traditions. It is my hope that we can continue to foster an environment here where members may disagree on nearly everything, but we can still treat each other with respect. Yes, we have our work cut out for us, and at times debates will surely be heated. But it's our responsibility to set the standard for how committees can uphold civility and decency while completing our work for the American people, even when, and especially when, we disagree. It's also great to see all of our committee colleagues here today. Welcome back to those who are returning, and welcome to our two newest members, Representative Griffith and Jack. Buckle up, you're in for a ride. Sadly, over the past 2 years under Republican control, the Rules Committee has become the place where democracy goes to die. Chairwoman, I know that you weren't appointed yet, so you didn't have a part to play in the decision-making. But to give you just one example of what I'm talking about, there were over 40 proposed rules changes for the 119th Congress submitted during our committee's Member Day hearing last year. Not one of those changes were included in the new rules package that we passed earlier this month. And though many of the proposals were blocked, and though many of the proposals that were blocked were widely supported and were bipartisan, Speaker Johnson also blocked ideas from his own conference. The Speaker stripped out what the GOP touted as an important change they made to the rules last Congress that required members introducing bills to submit a statement listing the single subject of the bill. Mr. Griffith, the original sponsor of that rule and now a member of our committee, even pushed to strengthen it this Congress. And if I remember correctly, the last time Mr. Griffith was in this room was to testify at our Member Day hearing on his proposal. His leadership not only ignored his request, but scrapped his watered-down rule that he got in the last Congress. So Republican leaders have used our committee to sideline and silence members on both sides of the aisle, and jamming through bills and shutting down debate, blocking an unprecedented number of amendments, breaking their own record for the most closed rules in history. I couldn't help but take note of the fact, Madam Chair, that you mentioned the 5-minute rule here in the committee. I would just point out, speaking for the Democrats, that the ratio here is 9-4. You have more than double our members. There's no other committee in Congress where this is the ratio. And so we would be very concerned about any attempt to limit debate, especially on our side, given the fact that you outnumber us so much. I have no problem if you want to limit the debate on your side. I would support you in that. But anyway, but on our side, I think we would object. But we are concerned about the dysfunction and the disarray and the incompetence and the inaction that we saw in the last Congress. And this Congress, Speaker Johnson has turned over the gavel to some of the most extreme members of the Republican conference in ways that I've never seen before. So let's be clear. House Republicans are entering the 119th Congress with the slimmest majority in nearly a century. That is not a mandate. The House GOP lost seats in the last election because the American people are fed up with the gridlock and the dysfunction. And what Americans are asking for is an end to partisan games and to get to work. They want us to solve problems, not create more. And one way to do that at the Rules Committee is by returning to a process that prioritizes bipartisanship and transparency. There is an opportunity here for us to do better, to allow more debate, more amendments, and more time for members to review bills before they are rushed to the floor. We can rebuild the Rules Committee's role as a place where good ideas are advanced and put up for a vote. I think in the world's greatest deliberative body, we should not be afraid of deliberation and debate. Let's take this opportunity and make it count. And again, Madam Chair, I'm looking forward to serving with you and to working with you. And again, congratulations on your chairmanship. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. And you said we don't agree on very much, but we do agree on we want to work hard for the American people and get things done. So I think that's a sentiment we all share. And I think if that's what we focus on, we'll be in good shape. The first order of business is the adoption of committee rules for the 119th Congress. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the Rules Committee adopt the chairwoman's proposed committee rules for the 119th Congress.
Thank you. There are a few small changes made to the committee rules. The first is changing the meeting time of the committee from 5 p.m. to 4 p.m. to reflect the actual meeting time that's been in practice. So that's been put in. Additionally, there were modifications made to notice timelines to reflect committee practice, conforming changes related to truth and testimony disclosures, and a modification to the committee journal requirements. Without objection, the proposed rules will be considered as read and open for amendment. Is there any discussion or amendment to the proposed rules?
Yeah.
Mr. McGovern.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the committee rules. My amendment would prevent this committee from reporting a rule for a bill that screws over my constituents by giving massive corporate giveaways and tax breaks to the rich and powerful. We're living under the Trump tax plan right now. I don't know too many people who think that it's fair. go out and ask Americans if they think it's fair that they pay taxes while billionaire corporations pay next to nothing. And I don't want to hear about how tax cuts help the economy. All of the corporate gains from the Republican tax scam, all of them went to the shareholders and high-paid executives with absolutely nothing flowing to workers. That's the truth. And the new Republican plan would cut taxes even more on people making billions of dollars while jacking up everyone else's taxes to pay for those cuts. How is that fair? How is it fair to ask everyone else to pay more so that big banks and tech billionaires can pay less? We all know it's not. So every time we debate tax policy in this committee, my Republican friends insist that their policies benefit average, hardworking Americans. And every single bill that they pass does the opposite. So my amendment is simple. If Republicans believe in helping regular people and not just their rich donors, they will vote yes on this amendment, which prevents cutting taxes on the super rich donor, on their super rich donor friends. If they vote no, they're voting to give tax cuts to the billionaires who take private jets to Mar-a-Lago, and they're going to make you, the American people, pay for it. And so I hope everybody will support this amendment. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I'll just note that I look forward to the gentleman's support then of the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act and the $700 and something billion of subsidies that go to billion-dollar corporations to subsidize China and undermine American oil and gas and energy and the grid of the United States. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Any other member wish to speak? Mr. Scott.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to point out that U.S. tax revenues are higher than they've ever been in the history of the country under Donald Trump's tax laws.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on Mr. McGovern's amendment? Hearing no further discussion, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not
And
agreed.
that's for a recorded vote.
Gentleman asked for a recorded vote.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Yes.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk has called the roll, and now the clerk's reported the total. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The chair, I'm sorry. The clerk will report the total. Sorry.
Four yeas, 9 nays.
Thank you. The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there other amendments or discussion? Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, Madam Chair, and welcome back, I understand, to the
Thank
Rules
you.
Committee.
For what purpose do you seek recognition?
I have an amendment to the committee rules.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
My amendment would simply require a 2/3 vote instead of a simple majority to report any rule that waives the 72-hour rule. I want to recognize that the ranking member was the original author of this rule that requires 72 hours between introduction of a bill and its consideration on the floor. And it requires the 72 hours so all members of Congress and the public have the opportunity to read a bill before it comes up for a vote. Before that, the 72-hour wasn't a 72-hour rule. It was written in a way that was easily bypassed. This would write it in a way that actually gives us and the public 72 hours to read a bill when that is not waived. So this is a common sense, good government, bipartisan concern as we've heard it. We've heard many times from folks on the other side of the aisle how frustrated they are that they don't have enough time to read the bills. Even Donald Trump and Elon Musk have said it's wrong that bills are jammed through up here without enough time to read them. So here's our chance to change that. This amendment is super simple. All it says is that we need a 2/3 vote to bypass the 72-hour rule instead of a majority vote. That's it. And because there's 9 Republicans and only 4 Democrats on this committee, you can still waive this rule with a party line vote. One of the critics of rushing bills to the floor was Representative Massey, who was with us for the last term, and he thought that he could provide more time for people to read votes with his membership on the committee, but that was a mistake. He said, my concerns had been greatly ameliorated by my inclusion on this committee, but learn from him, because last Congress, he was bypassed when his leadership violated the 72-hour rule repeatedly, and there was nothing he could do about it. So again, if you agree with critics of this body, including often the Freedom Caucus, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, that we shouldn't jam through bills at the last second, I'm asking that you vote for this amendment, and I would yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Mr. Roy?
I have very strong support of the need to enforce the 72-hour rule. I'm actually sympathetic to the spirit of the amendment. I'm going to oppose the amendment based on the, I think, belief that this committee wants to enforce the 72-hour rule. To the best of my recollection, last Congress, it was waived once in this committee. That's what I'm informed. And then I think we got rolled a couple of times on suspension on things that were less than 72 hours. We had a lot of conversations and debate about enforcing the 72-hour rule, notably the Wednesday before Christmas, when legislation was wrongly brought to the floor of the House in violation of the 72-hour rule, which I was very public about. It was very public in a lot of different directions, my position on that matter. I will not be cowed on the need to push and fight for the 72-hour rule, no matter what happens on Twitter or what happens in this room. We need to enforce the 72-hour rule. I will respectfully vote against the amendment, but I will be allowed voice for the need to support the 72-hour rule.
Madam Chair?
Mr. McGovern?
Yeah, again, this is a strange debate because the gentleman who just spoke could easily give himself the power to enforce the 72-hour rule. And the Republicans are in charge, with all of you voting to waive the rule or to not waive the rule. I mean, you have the two-thirds majority to be able to do that. I'm as the author of the 72-hour rule provision in the first place, I would like to see it enforced. And the idea that leadership may find it convenient to kind of get around it, all I'm simply saying, if that's the case, then you ought to vote with the leadership to waive it. But the notion to be sympathetic but not give yourself the power to have any say in it is like, I mean.
Well, the gentleman yielded a good faith question. Am I correct in the eyes of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we waived it only once in committee? Is that, I'm asking, is that the position? Do we agree on that? For better or worse?
The gentleman, yeah.
Is that, do we agree that that's correct?
It was one time.
Yeah, so we waived it once, and I opposed waiving it once.
Well,
but
I want you to be able to have some power to.
Understood.
I mean, that's why it's like.
I yield back. I just wanted to establish I think there was a good faith. It's your time. I yield back.
Yes, Mr. Neguse. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your appointment as
Thank you.
The chair of this distinguished body. With respect to Mr. Roy's comment, and I have great respect for Mr. Roy, whom I consider a friend, but he is correct. We did waive, or rather Republicans waived that rule once. Just for the record, it was in March of 2024, and you gave a very powerful speech on the floor of the House, and there's a statement here that I can read from, which says, and quote, the $1.2 trillion bill was released at 2:30 a.m. yesterday morning, giving members just over 24 hours to review its 1,000 pages of text, despite House rules requiring we have at least 72 hours to review any measure. So that was 10 months ago. I mean, let's be serious. We all know that 2 months from now, 3 months from now, the 72-hour rule is going to be waived by a majority vote of this committee, and you'll be, I presume, voting against that waiver, but it will pass because a majority of the committee on your side will approve it, just as they did 10 months ago for the $1.2 trillion bill that you vociferously opposed. So it's unclear to me why we wouldn't put this two-thirds marker in so that ultimately you can protect the 72-hour window that Mr. McGovern had fought for so vigorously in the past. The only other champion for that rule has been removed from this committee. So, I mean, it just seems odd to me and nonsensical. Let's just put this in the rules, and it locks in that 72-hour window, which I agree with, and I think you have been a passionate supporter of in the past. I just think it makes sense. I don't think it's a controversial thing. And I suspect that you know, it'll be a little bit of heartburn on your side of the aisle, but at the end of the day, you're on the committee, so they're going to have to comply with your directives. I yield to the chairman, the ranking member.
Point out, by the official survey of activities that you guys produce, it was waived 3 times. And so, again, I would say why in the world would you, if you believe in the 72-hour rule, why in the world would you want to not have the ability to enforce the 72-hour rule? I don't get it, but whatever. I mean, you guys are in charge, so, yeah.
It was waived, the rule was, it was waived only once on the legislation, twice on the report.
Right.
Right.
And this amendment would cover both.
Okay?
I mean,
Anyone else wish to speak on Mr. McGovern's amendment? I'm sorry, Ms. Scanlon's amendment. Okay? There being no further discussion, the clerk will call the roll. You didn't ask for it. No, I should ask, sorry.
Yeah.
All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is
And we
not
would
agreed to.
request a recorded vote.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just skipping the step I knew was coming. Okay, the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there other amendments or discussion?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Madam Chair, it will be fun, I am sure, serving with you again. You were the chair on the Education Committee when I served there, so I look forward to the Congress ahead. I have an amendment to the committee rules. My amendment would prevent the committee from reporting a rule to consider a reconciliation bill that increases the deficit. We hear from Republicans and many on this committee, and some that we will sadly miss, that the government spends too much and we need to cut spending. We hear often about the deficit. So if Republicans really want to cut the deficit, they should have no problem passing this amendment. If they vote no on this amendment, I think we are going to be seeing a level of hypocrisy that will be important for us to point out to the American people, because it will start in this committee. The 2017 Trump's tax cuts blew up the deficit. It was a massive giveaway to the rich. Very little went to working families. Instead, it went to the billionaires and the billionaire class. It was an example of Republicans standing with billionaires, and it added $2 trillion to the deficit. Trump's pickpocket economics doesn't stop there. Just a few weeks ago, Republicans tried to shut down the government because they insisted on an increase to the debt ceiling that would have set them up to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, as well as cutting Social Security and Medicare. Once again, siding with the rich over the working families. I need to recognize that Representative Roy stood up and spoke against that. He noted that that move led in many ways by Musk, who was not elected, would have added $5 trillion to the debt. $5 trillion to the debt, and there hadn't been any conversation about it. We are seeing proposals that would add significantly to the debt and to the deficit. We are also seeing conversations that Republicans want to eliminate the impact of tax cuts on the deficit. Well, that's ridiculous. Anybody who knows, who has run a business or run a household, knows that your income and your expenditures must be reviewed in tandem. So if Republicans want to extend those terrible tax cuts for 10 years, we understand that the CBO has already said it would add $4.6 trillion to the deficit. The Congressional Budget Office is stating it would add $4.6 trillion to the deficit. Now, we don't know what the reconciliation package will look like, but if it looks like anything that has already been proposed, we'd be seeing an incredible increase on the deficit. So our amendment to our rules is simple. We hear in this committee over and over again your concern about the deficit. Let's make sure we discuss it in this committee. It says Republicans can't blow up the deficit with a tax plan that hurts regular people. I urge Republicans to stand with their statements on the deficit and to support this amendment. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Does any member wish to speak? Ms. Houchin.
Madam Chair, I would just like to note that the CBO has been wrong multiple times in their estimations. In fact, the CBO predicted revenues for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They were off by, revenues are $1.6 trillion higher than what the CBO projected. In addition, on the Inflation Reduction Act, they scored it as $271 billion of cost. 6 months later, they updated that to $663 billion. It scores $1 trillion plus when you consider tax subsidies. So we are at a point at least on our side of the aisle, that naturally the CBO score has been incorrect so many times that we're skeptical of that. And so for that reason, I would oppose this amendment.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern?
Madam Chair, so by that logic, there's no way to measure the impact of tax cuts on the debt. We just have to trust, Elon Musk to tell us whether it's going to impact the deficit negatively or not. I mean, a lot of Republicans act like reducing the debt is their religion around here. That is you. This amendment will help you get it right with the Lord if you really truly believe that. And if you constantly complain about the debt and deficit, this is your first and best chance in this Congress to do something about it. But to make believe that tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires and big corporations are not going to impact the deficit or the debt, I mean, what planet are we living on here? This is, a reasonable, sensible amendment if you actually mean what you say about caring about deficits and the debt. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Anyone else wish to speak? Mr. Scott?
Madam Chair, I just want to point out, federal tax revenues are up, from $3.3 trillion in 2017 to $5.08 trillion this past year. That's a pretty significant increase since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act went into effect. It was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. So again, federal tax revenues are higher than they've ever been in the history of the country. The problem with the deficit is Democrats spent $3 trillion through the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan without a single Republican vote.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Anyone else wish to speak on the proposed amendment?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Roy.
Again, this is an amendment that I'm sympathetic to, and we'll have more things to say as the reconciliation process unfolds. My issue is in reliance solely on the Congressional Budget Office, which, I actually think by definition under the Budget Control Act is something that we have to use and rely upon. It's a part of the entire debate. So we have to recognize that or change how CBO operates. The fact of the matter is both parties have been horrifically bad at dealing with spending and revenues and the fact that we have been mounting deficits on an annual basis. We can't run away from that reality. I think that my issue here is the reliance solely on the Congressional Budget Office, because what we're going to end up with here is the usual dance which is people saying we're going to have X revenue growth, and there's going to just be a made-up number of whatever the expected growth rates are, and whether that will then produce the revenue relative to whatever the tax policy is. On the flip side, we will have zero support from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and frankly, large chunk of my colleagues on this side of the aisle, on spending cuts. That's what's going to happen this year, and we're going to end up with massive deficits. But I think we're going to have to work through this and to make determinations on how we move legislation through here that actually reduce deficits. And CBO is one metric. I think there are other metrics that we're going to need to look at as a body. And at the end of the day, it's a political question. But
Would the gentleman
I will yield. Yeah.
It sounds like the gentleman has some other metrics in mind. Perhaps we could have a friendly amendment to this amendment and just add in a couple more of those metrics. So whoever else, whatever entity you want to add,
I could probably support the rule if it just said measure that, strike the Congressional Budget Office has determined that will result in a net increase of the deficit and may be reported to the House. Because I just don't want to rely solely on whatever the Congressional Budget Office says.
good.
I would offer an amendment that would look like that. I would gladly.
With that friendly, I would support the amendment.
Sounds good. I mean, I'm not the author of the amendment, but it sounds like the author is.
Yeah, I'm willing to amend.
So you wish to amend?
I will amend my amendment to say that would increase the deficit. And have to withdraw this and add a new one, we'll write it up real quick.
We need that in writing.
Yeah. Oh. Could you give us 2 minutes, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's go on and see. Does anyone else wish to offer an amendment to the rules?
Well, I haven't spoken on the amendment, but I would just hope, given I very much appreciate Representative Roy's cooperation and thoughtfulness, and I would assume that this also resolves the concerns that Ms. Houchin expressed, because the entire bulk of your objection was purely based on the CBO. I mean, that was according to what you had just stated a moment ago. So I presume you'll support the amendment as well, and we can all support the amendment and try to reduce the deficit. So I appreciate everyone's cooperation on that front.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
The gentlewoman would read her changed amendment.
The changed amendment, the amendment would read exactly as proposed earlier with the following words stricken: the Congressional Budget Office has determined. So the amendment would read, I shall read it all. In Rule 3C, insert the following after paragraph 1 and reorder accordingly. 2, no resolution providing for consideration of a budget reconciliation measure that will result in a net increase to the deficit may be reported to the House in writing.
Does everyone understand the changes to the amendment?
Madam Chair, so this means that we can take any report we want to? This literally means we can take any report we want to from any organization we want to?
I'm not sure how it will be interpreted by the parliamentarians, but at least we're not bound by the Congressional Budget Office.
But it still would stand in conflict with the Budget Control Act, right? I'm still going to oppose the amendment, Madam Chair.
While I appreciate Ms. Leisure-Fernandez listening to Mr. Roy and making an amendment to her amendment, I will be voting no, because I don't think we need to be making this kind of major change here immediately. I think this needs further thought and discussion, and Mr. Roy may vote for the amended amendment, but I'm going to vote no, and I'd urge other committee members to vote no. There being no further discussion, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
A recorded vote, Madam Chair.
The gentlewoman has requested a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Aye. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
5 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it, and the amendment's not agreed to.
Getting closer.
Are there any, other amendments? All right, hearing no further discussion, the question is on the adoption of the committee rules. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there any further discussion here this morning? We'll now proceed with the designation of the vice chair. Clause 2D of Rule 11, adopted by the House, provides that committee chairs may designate a vice chair. Pursuant to the rule, I designate the Honorable Morgan Griffith from Virginia as vice chair of the Committee on Rules. It is now in order to provide for the composition of the subcommittees of the 119th Congress. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to Rule 5C of the committee rules, I move that each of the subcommittees of the 119th Congress shall be composed of 5 majority members and 2 minority members.
The subcommittee sizes and ratios shall remain the same as previous Congresses. The ratio will be 5-2, which has been the practice of Republican and Democrat majorities. Any further discussion on that amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the motion from the gentleman from Virginia. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Now, I would like to further consult with the majority and minority members on the composition of subcommittees. So without objection, we'll postpone subcommittee appointments. Without objection, the staff for both the majority and the minority of the Committee on Rules is approved, and without objection, the committee staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the rules reported by the committee for the duration of the 119th Congress. If there's no further discussion, without objection, the organizational meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.